This week, there was a very small story that made a very small blip in the news, but it brought me great satisfaction. The story was located in the small but beautiful space of overlap between two of my areas of interest and passion: the American Jewish community and English grammar. And what happened was that this week, in case it passed you by, like 98% of the rest of the population, this week the New York Times acknowledged a small but consequential change that it had made to its internal editorial standards. Made the change quietly and without any fanfare back in August of this year. And the change went undetected at the time by virtually all of the paper's readership, except, I should note, those of us who are equally fascinated by the American Jewish community and English grammar, until 3 days ago. And what happened 3 days ago was that the paper's associate managing editor for standards officially confirmed that it had adopted a grammatical change, which was recommended by the official style guide of the Associated Press. The change concerns the spelling of the word anti-Semitism. And up until August, that word had been spelled with a capital S and a hyphen in the middle of the word. Now, the official spelling drops the hyphen and utilizes a lowercase s, so that anti-Semitism is written as one single unbroken, unhyphenated word. Now, the change reflects the position that has been promoted by academics and leaders of the Jewish community for a very long time. I remember sitting in a lecture on the same topic about 20 years ago when I was a rabbinical student. And the reason for the change from anti-Semitism to anti-Semitism is connected to the history of the word. The word, with the hyphen and the capital S, was coined in the year 1879 by a German nationalist named Wilhelm Marr. As you might safely assume about the guy who literally invented the word anti-Semitism, Marr was not very fond of the Jews, and he was looking for a phrase to describe that ideology. Up until that point, the more commonly used word in German would have been Judenhass, Jew hatred. But Marr, despite his bigoted views, felt that that term came across as overly brusque and crude. He thought of himself as a sophisticated, cultured member of German high society, and so he wanted to come up with a phrase that sounded a little bit more polished, a little bit more refined to describe the hatred of Jews. So he drew on the concepts of racist pseudoscience, which would surge back into favor during the Nazi era, asserting that Jews belong to an inferior Semitic race. So for Marr, classifying oneself as anti-Semitic, being opposed to those who are descended from the Semitic peoples of the Middle East, that draped a more elegant statement of personal ethnic philosophy around the more thuggish hatred of Jews that was out of place in polite society in the late 1800s. And so anti-Semitism, or anti-Semitism, was born. And the term has stuck with us since then, but it's been problematic for a very long time. For one thing, it is, I hope you'll agree, complicated for us to use a term created by a racist to describe the phenomenon of prejudice and hatred in our own communities. And for another thing, it's been clear for a very long time that that sort of racialized definition of the Jewish people is inaccurate and harmful. Because, after all, not all Jews are Semites, and not all Semites are Jews. So rather than trying to come up with a whole new word to describe the hatred of Jews, we created a new word to fit the bill by taking Wilhelm Marr's German word, plucking out the hyphen and removing the capital S, and seeing this change reflected in the style guide of the Associated Press and the New York Times is very good news indeed. But it's important to remember that fixing the grammar of anti-Semitism is not the same thing as fixing anti-Semitism. Orienting ourselves toward that task is the real challenge of the day, lest we become distracted. That is the work that stands clearly and demandingly in front of us. I'm sure that all of us have seen the statistics about anti-Semitic hate crime in our country and even in our state over the past year. That we've all heard the stories about attacks on Jews throughout America, hate speech and vandalism, wild and poisonous conspiracy theories. In today's fractious and divided political atmosphere, the hatred of Jews in America seems to be the one thing that can reliably unite the radical fringe of the far left and the white nationalists of the far right. And amidst all of this, it is disappointing to note that our country has not yet even granted a hearing for the confirmation of the president's nominee to serve as the next U.S. envoy to combat and monitor anti-Semitism, Professor Deborah Lipstadt. Dr. Lipstadt, as you may know, is probably our nation's foremost authority on anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. There's no one else I know of in our entire country who is as trusted and qualified as she is to fill this post. Her nomination has been supported by virtually every Jewish communal organization across the country, which, if you know any Jews, is quite remarkable indeed. Jews across the ideological and political spectrum have endorsed and supported this nomination. But Congress has failed to act on it, even though she was nominated all the way back on July the 30th. Since then, this vital role, our nation's anti-Semitism envoy, has remained vacant because the nomination process has been deliberately slow-walked by a small number of legislators, including, I am embarrassed to point out, our own state's junior senator. This is not good news for the American Jewish community or for our country as a whole. And it is my hope that our Congress and our country will recognize how critical this nomination is and will advance it swiftly and conscientiously. And now to our Torah portion for this week. As our B'nai Mitzvah know perfectly well, this week we hear the story of Joseph and his brothers, the reunion of that feuding family after years of separation, which had been set in motion by the jealous dispute over the famous coat of many colors. In this week's portion, Joseph reveals his true identity, and in a moment of dramatic, emotional, tearful reconciliation, the brothers embrace warmly and gratefully when Joseph announces, "Ani Yosef, I am Joseph, your brother." After this dramatic moment of reconnection, Joseph sends his siblings back to Canaan so that they can collect his father and bring him back to a reunion for the whole family in Egypt. Just before Joseph sends them on their way, however, he gives them one last instruction before they go. Al tirgazu baderech. Don't fight along the way. He offers this instruction because Joseph knows, as do we as readers of the Torah, that again and again, small and minuscule conflicts over a multicolored coat, over a bowl of lentil stew, over access to wells of water, these things can spiral out of control into intractable disputes with tragic and irreversible consequences. Joseph knows this, and he wants to make sure that his family will stay united, that the brothers won't allow a petty argument on the long road from Egypt to Canaan and back again to result in another heartbreaking and irreversible split in the family. So he tells them, don't fight along the way. Remember what's most important. Stay loyal to your tribe, to your family, because there are more important things than our own particular parochial concerns. The week that we read this portion, we have just made our way through the festival of Hanukkah, on which we remember the miracle of the oil, the celebration of Jewish autonomy and Jewish self-determination. But the foundation of the Hanukkah story was laid far earlier, within the bitter internal conflicts within the Jewish community about how to conduct ourselves in the political crucible of the Greek Empire. During that time, there was terrible conflict within the Jewish community. One Jew turned against another by differences of opinion. Those political and ideological disagreements happened far before the Maccabees came along, and there certainly have been plenty more since that time. But what the Hanukkah story reminds us, just like the Joseph story reminds us, is that at times when it matters most, our fate and our future depend on our ability to set aside our differences and come together in pursuit of progress and moral virtue. During these days when bigotry and hatred are always at risk of bursting into flame anew, we need to be united as one community to expose and condemn anti-Semitism wherever it lurks. We can only do this if we are united with each other and to remember what is most important, the bonds of peoplehood that unite us together. And we too must be cautious not to fight along the way. I was grateful to see this change in the style guide of the Associated Press and the New York Times, to see that the hyphen and the lowercase s were removed from that terrible word of anti-Semitism, but I am well aware that it will take more than that small punctuation change to fix anti-Semitism. And so in a way, I am glad that this small story didn't make any more than a small blip in the news, because it's a reminder of what is most important to all of us, that we must stay together as one to ensure that our religious progress will be punctuated with the grammar of goodness as we stand together against bigotry and hatred, so that all of us together, regardless of how we vote, or where we live, or what we look like, will be united and certain not to fight along the way. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.